"Marry me now or my tribe will kill you," warned the Comanche princess to the stranger. The arrow whistled past his ear with deadly precision, embedding itself deep into the cottonwood bark behind him. Samuel Crawford froze, his weathered hands slowly rising as 20 mounted warriors emerged from the canyon shadows like ghosts materializing from the desert heat. Their war paint gleamed in the harsh Texas sun, and their horses snorted and stamped, sensing the tension that crackled through the air like summer lightning. But it was not the warriors that made his breath catch in his throat. It was the woman who rode at their center. She sat astride a magnificent paint horse with the natural grace of someone born to the saddle, her long black hair flowing like silk in the wind. Her bronze skin glowed with health and vitality, and her dark eyes held an intelligence that cut through him like a blade. She could not have been more than 20 summers, but there was something ancient and knowing in her gaze that spoke of wisdom beyond her years. Samuel had been tracking a stolen herd of cattle for 3 days across the unforgiving landscape of West Texas, following hoofprints through mesquite thickets and across sun-baked arroyos. The year was 1867, and the frontier was still a place where a man could disappear without a trace, where the line between civilization and wilderness was drawn in blood and measured in bullets. He had not expected to find himself surrounded by Comanche warriors. He certainly had not expected to find himself staring into the most beautiful face he had ever seen. The young woman urged her horse forward, the animal responding to the slightest pressure of her knees. She wore traditional Comanche dress of fringed buckskin, dress adorned with intricate beadwork that caught the light like scattered stars. Silver bracelets encircled her wrists, and a necklace of bear claws rested against her throat. Every detail spoke of high status within her tribe. "You trespass on sacred ground, white man," she said, her English clear and precise despite the slight accent that colored her words. "These hills belong to the Comanche. They have belonged to us since the world was young." Samuel kept his hands raised but allowed his eyes to meet hers. At 30 years old, he had learned to read danger in all its forms. But this woman presented a challenge unlike any he had faced before. She was beautiful, yes, but beneath that beauty lay something far more complex: intelligence, authority, and a barely contained wildness that reminded him of a mountain cat poised to strike. "I mean no disrespect, miss," he said carefully. "I am tracking stolen cattle. 20 head of longhorns taken from my ranch 3 days ago. The trail led me here." A murmur rippled through the warriors, and several reached for their weapons. But the woman raised a slender hand, and they fell silent immediately. The gesture revealed everything Samuel needed to know about her position within the group. This was no ordinary Comanche maiden. This was someone with real power. "I am Ayanna," she said, her chin lifting with unmistakable pride. "Daughter of Chief Running Bear, granddaughter of the great war chief Iron Wolf. These warriors follow me because I have proven myself in battle and in wisdom. Your cattle wandered onto our land and mixed with our horses. By the laws of my people, they now belong to us." Samuel felt sweat trickle down his spine despite the evening breeze that had begun to stir the grass around them. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. He had heard stories of what happened to white men who crossed the Comanche, tales that were whispered around campfires and spoken in hushed tones in the saloons of distant towns. Most of those stories did not end well for the white men involved. "Those cattle represent my livelihood," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Without them, I will lose my ranch. I have worked 10 years to build what I have." Ayanna studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes taking in every detail of his appearance. Samuel was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands that spoke of hard work and honest labor. His brown hair was slightly too long and touched with premature gray at the temples, and his blue eyes held a steadiness that suggested he was not easily frightened. He wore simple clothes, brown leather chaps over denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and worn boots that had carried him across thousands of miles of rough country. His hat was battered and sun-bleached, shaped by years of wind and weather. A Colt revolver hung at his hip, but he made no move toward it. "You speak of your ranch as if it matters to me," Ayanna said. "You speak of your years of work as if they give you claim to our ancestral lands. Tell me, Samuel Crawford, why should I care about the struggles of a white settler?" The fact that she knew his name sent a chill through him. He had not introduced himself, which meant she had been watching him, perhaps for days. The Comanche were legendary for their ability to move unseen across the landscape, and it appeared their reputation was well-deserved. "You should not care," he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "I have no claim on your compassion or your mercy, but I am asking for both." Something flickered in Ayanna's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or respect. She had clearly not expected such a direct answer. "My warriors believe you should die," she said matter-of-factly. "They say you are a spy for the soldiers, that you bring nothing but trouble to our people. They point to the burned villages and the broken treaties and say that every white man who enters our territory is an enemy." Samuel felt the weight of 20 pairs of hostile eyes upon him. Several of the warriors had knocked arrows to their bowstrings, and others had drawn war clubs and tomahawks. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. "I am no spy," he said. "I am simply a rancher trying to make an honest living on land I bought and paid for. I have never harmed a Comanche, and I have no quarrel with your people." "Land you bought and paid for," Ayanna repeated, and there was a bitter note in her voice. "From whom did you buy it?" "From the spirits of my ancestors who are buried in these hills. From the buffalo whose bones bleach in the sun because your people slaughtered them for sport? From the wind and the rain and the endless sky?" Samuel had no answer for that. The question cut to the heart of the great tragedy that was unfolding across the American frontier, the collision between two completely different ways of understanding land ownership and the relationship between human beings and the natural world. "I bought it from the territorial government," he said quietly. "I followed the laws of my people, just as you followed the laws of yours." "Laws written by men who had never set foot in this country," Ayanna replied. "Laws that treat the earth like a commodity to be bought and sold, rather than a living thing to be respected and protected." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of a young warrior who rode up beside Ayanna and spoke to her in rapid Comanche. Samuel could not understand the words, but the urgency in the man's voice was unmistakable. Ayanna listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each passing moment. When the warrior finished speaking, Ayanna turned back to Samuel with a new intensity in her gaze. "My scouts report that a company of cavalry is approaching from the east," she said. "They are perhaps 2 hours away, moving fast and following your trail. It seems you have brought exactly the kind of trouble my warriors predicted." Samuel felt his heart sink. He had not told anyone where he was going when he set out to track his stolen cattle, but someone must have seen him leave and reported his absence. The territorial government had been cracking down hard on cattle rustling, and they apparently assumed he had been killed or captured by Indians. "I did not ask them to follow me," he said. "I came alone because I hope to resolve this matter peacefully." "Peacefully," Ayanna said, and there was a note of incredulous laughter in her voice. "Do you know what will happen when those soldiers find us here? They will not stop to ask questions or listen to explanations. They will see Comanche warriors and they will attack, just as they attacked my uncle's village last winter, just as they attacked the camp at Sand Creek." Samuel knew about Sand Creek. Every person on the frontier knew about Sand Creek, where Colonel Chivington's Colorado militia had massacred hundreds of Cheyenne and Arapaho people, most of them women and children. The name had become synonymous with the worst excesses of the Indian Wars. "There must be something we can do," he said. "Some way to avoid bloodshed." Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the eastern horizon where dust clouds were beginning to appear. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, more thoughtful, but also more dangerous. "There is one way," she said, "but it would require a sacrifice on your part that you may not be willing to make. Tell me. Among my people, Marriage is not just a bond between two individuals. It is an alliance between families, between clans, between entire groups of people. If you were to become my husband, you would become a member of our tribe. You would be under our protection, and any attack on you would be an attack on all of us." Samuel stared at her, not sure he had heard correctly. The idea was so unexpected, so completely outside the realm of possibility he had been considering, that his mind struggled to process it. "You are suggesting that we marry? Here? Now?" "I am suggesting that you choose between a Comanche wedding ceremony and a cavalry burial detail," Ayanna replied with brutal directness, "because those are your only options. My warriors will not flee from approaching soldiers, and you cannot escape 20 mounted Comanche. But if you become one of us, if you take me as your wife according to our customs, then we become your people and you become ours." The warriors around them had begun to grow restless, their horses prancing and snorting as they sensed the approaching danger. Several of them spoke urgently to Ayanna in their own language, clearly advocating for immediate action of the lethal variety. "They want to kill me now and scatter before the cavalry arrives," Samuel said, reading the situation with the instincts of a man who had survived on the frontier for over a decade. "That would be the sensible thing to do," Ayanna agreed. "But I am known among my people for making choices that are not always sensible. The question is whether you are willing to do the same." Samuel looked around at the circle of warriors, then back at the woman who had just offered him the most impossible choice of his life. Marriage to a Comanche princess would mean abandoning everything he had built, everything he had worked for, everything he understood about his place in the world. It would mean becoming an outsider among his own people, a man without a country or a culture to call his own. But the alternative was death, and a meaningless death at that. His cattle would still be lost, his ranch would still be forfeit, and his body would lie forgotten in an unnamed canyon in West Texas. More than that, though, there was something about Ayanna herself that called to him in ways he could not fully understand. Her beauty was obvious, but it was more than that. There was an intelligence in her eyes, a strength in her bearing, a wildness in her spirit that spoke to something deep within his own soul. She was like no woman he had ever met, and he found himself wondering what it would be like to know her, not as an enemy or a captor, but as a partner. "What would this marriage ceremony involve?" he asked. "We would exchange vows before these witnesses," Ayanna replied. "We would share food and water, and I would paint symbols of protection on your face. It would be recognized as binding by my people, and you would have all the rights and responsibilities of a Comanche husband. And afterwards? Afterwards, you would come with us to our winter camp. You would learn our ways, our language, our customs. You would hunt with our warriors and sit in council with our elders. You would become Comanche in all but blood." Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, trying to imagine such a life. It was so far from anything he had planned or expected that it felt like contemplating existence on another planet. But when he opened his eyes and looked at Ayanna again, he found that the idea was not entirely unwelcome. "And if I refuse? Then my warriors will kill you quickly and with honor, and we will be gone before the soldiers arrive. Your death will be blamed on hostile Indians, and the cycle of violence will continue as it always has." The dust clouds on the horizon were growing larger and more distinct. Samuel estimated that the cavalry would reach them within the hour, and once they arrived, any chance for peaceful resolution would disappear in gunsmoke and blood. "Why?" he asked suddenly. "Why offer me this choice? You could simply kill me and be done with it. Why risk the complications that marriage would bring?" Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than it had been before. "Because I have seen enough death," she said. "Because I am tired of watching the world become a smaller and more violent place with each passing season. Because sometimes, when two peoples are at war, it takes individuals willing to cross the divide to remind everyone else that we are all human beings with hopes and dreams and the desire to live in peace." She paused, and her dark eyes met his with an intensity that made his breath catch. And because, in the 3 days that we have been watching you track your cattle across our land, I have seen that you are not like the other white men who come here. You move with respect for the landscape. You do not waste water or leave unnecessary signs of your passage. You speak to your horse as if it were a friend rather than a tool. These things tell me that you might be capable of understanding our ways." Samuel felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition that went deeper than mere attraction or expedience. This woman had been studying him, learning about him, trying to understand who he was beneath the surface. The fact that she had seen something in him worth preserving spoke to a wisdom and compassion that he had not expected to find in the middle of a hostage situation. "If I agree to this," he said slowly, "if I become your husband and join your tribe, what happens to my ranch? To the life I have built?" "That life is already lost," Ayanna replied with brutal honesty. "Whether you die here today or disappear into Comanche territory, the result is the same. Your ranch will be seized by the territorial government for unpaid taxes. Your cattle will be sold to pay your debts. Your name will be forgotten within a generation." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. She was right, of course. The moment he had ridden into Comanche territory, his old life had effectively ended. The only question now was whether he would have a chance to begin a new one. "There is something else you should know," Ayanna continued. "If you agree to marry me, it will not be a marriage of convenience or political expedience. Among my people, marriage is a sacred bond that is not entered into lightly. I will expect you to be a true husband to me, and I will be a true wife to you. We will share a lodge, a bed, and a future together. This is not a temporary arrangement to save your life. This is a commitment that will bind us together for as long as we both shall live." The implications of what she was saying struck Samuel with full force. This was not just about avoiding death or even about joining a new culture. This was about binding his life to hers in the most intimate and permanent way possible. He studied her face, trying to read the emotions behind her composed exterior. Was this simply a strategic decision on her part, or was there something more personal involved? Had she, like him, felt some spark of recognition or connection during their brief conversation? "You speak of being a true wife," he said carefully. "What does that mean to you?" "It means loyalty, partnership, and mutual respect," Ayanna replied without hesitation. "It means standing together against whatever challenges we may face. It means building a life together based on trust and understanding, even if we come from different worlds." She paused, and for the first time since their encounter began, he saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I will not lie to you, Samuel Crawford. I do not love you. How could I love a man I have known for less than an hour? But I believe that love can grow between two people who choose to honor and cherish each other, even if they begin as strangers." The honesty of her admission moved him more than any declaration of passion could have. She was offering him not romance or fantasy, but something far more precious, the possibility of a real partnership built on mutual choice and respect. "And if love does not grow between us?" he asked. "Then we will be companions who treat each other with kindness and dignity," Ayanna said. "We will be allies who support each other through good times and bad. We will be partners who work together to build something meaningful from the ruins of our separate pasts." The sound of approaching hoofbeats was growing louder now, and Samuel could see individual riders beginning to emerge from the dust clouds on the horizon. Time was running out, and he had to make the most important decision of his life with almost no time to consider the consequences. He looked around at the circle of warriors, all of whom were watching him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely contained hostility. Then he looked back at Ayanna, this extraordinary woman who had appeared in his life like a vision from another world and offered him a choice between death and transformation. "If I agree to this marriage," he said, "will you promise me something in return?" "What do you ask?" "Promise me that you will be patient with me as I learn your ways." Promise me that you will not give up on me when I make mistakes or fail to understand something that seems obvious to you. Promise me that you will give our marriage a real chance to succeed, even when the differences between us seem insurmountable." Ayanna nodded slowly, and he saw approval in her dark eyes. "I promise you these things," she said solemnly, "and I ask the same promises from you." "You have them," Samuel replied without hesitation. The sound of cavalry horses was now clearly audible, along with the jingle of spurs and sabers and the creaking of leather saddles. The soldiers would be upon them within minutes. "Then we must begin immediately," Ayanna said. She dismounted from her horse in a single fluid motion and walked to where Samuel stood with his hands still raised. "Lower your arms," she said gently. "You are no longer a prisoner. You are about to become my husband." Samuel slowly lowered his hands, and Ayanna took them in her own. Her skin was warm and soft, despite the calluses that spoke of a life spent working with horses and weapons and the countless tasks required for survival on the frontier. "Repeat after me," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. "I, Samuel Crawford, take you, Ayanna of the Comanche, to be my wife and my partner. I, Samuel Crawford, take you, Ayanna of the Comanche, to be my wife and my partner," Samuel repeated, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "I promise to honor your customs and respect your people," Ayanna continued. "I promise to honor your customs and respect your people. I promise to stand with you against all enemies and to share with you all good fortune. I promise to stand with you against all enemies and to share with you all good fortune." Ayanna reached into a leather pouch at her waist and withdrew a small clay bowl filled with red and white paint. With careful strokes, she began to paint symbols on Samuel's forehead and cheek, symbols that he did not understand but that clearly held deep meaning for her and for the watching warriors. "These marks identify you as a member of our tribe," she explained as she worked. "They will protect you from harm and announce to all who see you that you are under our protection." When she finished with the paint, she produced a piece of jerked meat and a small water skin. She tore the meat in half and handed one piece to Samuel, then took a drink from the water skin and passed it to him. "We share food and water as a symbol of our commitment to sustain each other through all the trials that life may bring," she said. They ate the meat and drank the water in silence, their eyes locked together in a moment of strange intimacy. Around them, the Comanche warriors watched with expressions that had shifted from hostility to curiosity and, in some cases, to what might have been approval. "Now," Ayanna said, "I, Ayanna, daughter of Running Bear, take you, Samuel Crawford, to be my husband and my partner. I promise to teach you our ways with patience and understanding. I promise to stand with you against all enemies and to share with you all good fortune." She reached up and placed her hands on either side of his face, her touch gentle but firm. "By the laws of my people, by the witness of these warriors, and by the blessing of the Great Spirit, we are now husband and wife," she said. "What has been joined here cannot be separated by any earthly power." Samuel felt a strange sensation wash over him, as if something fundamental in the world had shifted. He was no longer Samuel Crawford, solitary rancher and drifter. He was Samuel Crawford, husband of Ayanna, member of the Comanche tribe, a man whose entire identity had been transformed in the space of a few minutes. The sound of approaching cavalry was now very loud, and dust clouds were beginning to obscure the eastern horizon. Ayanna quickly mounted her horse and gestured for Samuel to mount his own animal. "Stay close to me," she said. "Let me do the talking when the soldiers arrive. Remember that you are now Comanche, and these soldiers are potentially hostile to us." Samuel swung into his saddle, feeling the familiar comfort of leather beneath him and reins in his hands. But everything else about his situation was utterly alien. He was surrounded by Comanche warriors who had been ready to kill him moments before, but who now regarded him as one of their own. He was married to a woman he had met less than an hour ago. He was about to face a company of United States cavalry not as a fellow American, but as a member of a tribe they considered hostile. The first soldiers appeared over a low ridge to the east, their blue uniforms dark with sweat and dust. There were perhaps 30 of them, led by a young lieutenant whose face was grim with determination and anticipation of violence. "Comanche war party," the lieutenant shouted, drawing his saber. "Prepare to charge." "Wait," Samuel called out, spurring his horse forward. "Lieutenant, hold your fire." The officer pulled up short, his eyes widening as he took in Samuel's appearance, the war paint on his face, his position among the Comanche riders, the casual way he sat his horse as if he belonged exactly where he was. "Samuel Crawford?" the lieutenant said uncertainly. "Is that you? We came looking for you when your neighbors reported you missing." "I am here of my own free will, Lieutenant," Samuel replied. "There has been no violence and no need for any." "But you are with hostile Indians," the lieutenant protested. "You have war paint on your face. What has happened to you?" Before Samuel could answer, Ayanna rode forward, her posture radiating the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command. "I am Ayanna, daughter of Chief Running Bear," she said, her English clear and precise. "This man is my husband, married to me according to the customs of my people. He is under our protection, and any threat to him is a threat to all of us." The lieutenant stared at her in disbelief, then turned back to Samuel. "Crawford, is this true? Have you married this Indian woman?" Samuel felt the weight of every eye upon him, soldiers, Comanche warriors, and most of all, his new wife. He thought of his abandoned ranch, his lost cattle, his former life had already seemed to belong to someone else. Then he thought of the promise he had just made and the woman who had offered him a chance at something completely different. "Yes," he said firmly, "it is true. Ayanna is my wife, and I am a member of her tribe." The lieutenant's face flushed with anger and confusion. "This is madness," he said. "You cannot simply abandon your own people and join the Indians. Come with us now, and we will sort this out back at the fort." "I am not abandoning anyone," Samuel replied. "I am choosing to build bridges instead of walls. I am choosing understanding instead of conflict." "You are choosing treason," the lieutenant snapped. "You are choosing to side with savages against your own kind." The word savages hung in the air like a curse, and Samuel saw several of the Comanche warriors reach for their weapons. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge, ready to explode into violence at the slightest provocation. "Lieutenant," Samuel said quietly, "I suggest you and your men withdraw. You have found me alive and unharmed, which was your mission. There is no need for bloodshed here today." "I cannot leave a white man among hostiles," the lieutenant insisted. "My orders are to bring you back safely." "Then your orders have been fulfilled," Ayanna said, her voice carrying a note of steel. "He is safe. He is also no longer your concern. He has chosen to join my people, and we have accepted him. You have no authority over him now." The standoff stretched on for long moments, with both groups of riders facing each other across a distance of perhaps 50 yards. The tension was palpable, and Samuel could feel how easily the situation could spiral into violence. Finally, the lieutenant seemed to realize that he was outnumbered and that any attempt to take Samuel by force would result in a battle he could not win. "This is not over, Crawford," he said. "The territorial government will want to hear about this. There will be consequences." "There are always consequences," Samuel replied. "The question is whether we choose consequences that lead to more death and division or consequences that lead to understanding and peace." The lieutenant wheeled his horse around and gestured to his men. "Mount up," he commanded. "We are returning to the fort." As the cavalry rode away, leaving only dust and the echo of hoofbeats, Samuel felt a profound sense of relief wash over him. The immediate crisis had passed, and somehow, miraculously, no blood had been shed. "That went better than I expected," Ayanna said, riding up beside him. "What happens now?" Samuel asked. "Now we ride to our winter camp," she replied. "You have much to learn about being Comanche, and we have a marriage to truly begin." As they set out across the vast Texas landscape, Samuel found himself riding beside a woman who was still largely a stranger to him, surrounded by warriors who had been his enemies just hours before. The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, and ahead lay a future that he could not have imagined when he woke up that morning. But for the first time in years, Samuel Crawford felt truly alive. He had stepped across a divide that few men had ever crossed, and in doing so, he had discovered that the world was far larger and more complex than he had ever dreamed. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever difficulties he would face in learning to be part of Ayanna's world, he knew that he had made the right choice. The alternative had been not just death, but the death of possibility itself. Now, riding beside his new wife toward an uncertain but hopeful future, Samuel felt that he had been given a second chance at life, and this time he was determined not to waste it. The journey to the winter camp took 4 days across terrain that grew progressively more rugged and beautiful. They traveled through valleys carpeted with buffalo grass, across streams that ran clear and cold from hidden springs, and over ridges that offered panoramic views of a landscape that seemed to stretch forever in every direction. The country was vast and untamed, shaped by forces far older and more powerful than human ambition. Samuel found himself riding between two worlds, no longer fully belonging to either. The Comanche warriors had accepted him with varying degrees of enthusiasm, some viewing him with open curiosity, while others maintained a polite but distant reserve. He understood their caution. Trust, he was learning, was something that had to be earned through actions rather than words, especially when those actions involved crossing the fundamental divide between peoples who had been at war for generations. Ayanna proved to be an excellent teacher and a patient guide. As they rode, she pointed out landmarks and natural features, telling him their Comanche names and the stories associated with them. She taught him basic phrases in her language, correcting his pronunciation with gentle humor when he mangled the unfamiliar sounds. "You speak Comanche like a buffalo with a sore throat," she said one evening as they made camp beside a natural spring. But there was warmth in her voice, and Samuel found himself looking forward to these moments of shared laughter. The physical challenges of the journey were manageable for a man accustomed to long days in the saddle, but the psychological adjustment proved more difficult. Samuel had spent his adult life as a solitary figure, responsible only for himself and his own survival. Now he was part of a community with complex social structures and unwritten rules that he was still learning to navigate. On the second night, as they sat around a small fire sharing a meal of roasted rabbit and wild onions, one of the younger warriors addressed him directly for the first time. "Why did you choose our way instead of your own?" the man asked in halting English. His name was Black Hawk, and he appeared to be roughly Samuel's age, though his face bore scars that spoke of battles and hardships that had aged him beyond his years. Samuel considered the question carefully before answering. He had been asking himself the same thing since the moment he agreed to Ayanna's proposal. "Because staying with my own way meant dying for nothing," he replied. "This way means living for something." Black Hawk nodded slowly, as if the answer made sense to him. "Living is always better than dying," he agreed. "But living as Comanche is not easy for someone born white. The spirits of your ancestors do not rest in our sacred places. The songs of your people do not rise from our fires. You will sometimes feel lost between worlds." "I feel lost between worlds now," Samuel admitted. "But I would rather be lost and searching than dead and forgotten." "That is a wise answer," Black Hawk said. "Perhaps you will find your place among us after all." As the days passed, Samuel began to understand that he was not just learning a new language or new customs. He was learning an entirely different way of seeing the world. The Comanche did not view the land as something to be owned or conquered, but as something to be lived with and respected. They moved across the landscape like water, adapting to its contours rather than trying to reshape it to suit their needs. This philosophy extended to their approach to time itself. Where white settlers were always rushing toward some distant goal, always planning for a future that might never arrive, the Comanche focused on the present moment and the immediate needs of their people. They planned for the seasons and prepared for the challenges they knew were coming, but they did not spend their days worrying about abstract possibilities or distant threats. Ayanna embodied this approach to life in ways that Samuel found both admirable and challenging. She was completely present in whatever she was doing, whether it was tending to her horse, preparing food, or teaching him the finer points of Comanche etiquette. Her attention was undivided and absolute, and she seemed to find meaning and satisfaction in tasks that Samuel might have considered mundane. "You think too much about yesterday and tomorrow," she told him on the third evening as they watched the sun set over a landscape painted in shades of gold and purple. "Among my people, we believe that life happens in the space between one breath and the next. If you are always thinking about other times, you miss the time that is actually yours." Samuel found this perspective both liberating and difficult to maintain. His entire adult life had been focused on building toward a future, accumulating resources and planning for contingencies. The idea of simply existing in the present moment felt almost impossibly foreign. But as they approached the winter camp on the fourth day, Samuel began to understand what Ayanna meant. The camp was situated in a natural bowl surrounded by low hills, with a stream running through its center and stands of cottonwood and oak providing both shelter and firewood. Smoke rose from dozens of tipis, and he could see children playing near the water while women worked at various tasks and men tended to horses in makeshift corrals. It was, Samuel realized, a complete and self-contained world. Everything needed for survival and comfort was present, from the practical necessities of food and shelter to the less tangible requirements of community and belonging. The camp had probably been in this location for only a few weeks, but it felt as permanent and established as any town Samuel had ever visited. The arrival of Ayanna's party created a stir of excitement and curiosity. Word of her marriage to a white man had apparently traveled ahead of them, and Samuel found himself the object of intense scrutiny from people of all ages. Children peered at him from behind their mothers' skirts, while elderly men and women studied him with eyes that seemed to see through to his very soul. Chief Running Bear emerged from the largest tipi to greet his daughter and meet his new son-in-law. He was a man of perhaps 50 summers, with iron-gray hair braided with feathers and beads, and a face that bore the marks of both wisdom and sorrow. His presence commanded immediate respect, and Samuel could see where Ayanna had inherited her natural authority. The chief spoke to his daughter in rapid Comanche, and Samuel caught enough of the conversation to understand that they were discussing his status within the tribe and the practical arrangements for his integration into camp life. "My father welcomes you to our people," Ayanna translated when the conversation concluded. "He says that any man brave enough to cross between worlds and wise enough to choose life over death is worthy of respect. He also says that you will be given a chance to prove yourself, but that chance will not last forever." "What does he mean by proving myself?" Samuel asked. "You will be expected to contribute to the welfare of the tribe," Ayanna explained. "You must learn our ways of hunting and fighting. You must show that you can provide for a family and defend your people when necessary. Most importantly, you must demonstrate that you understand what it means to be Comanche." Over the following weeks, Samuel threw himself into this process of cultural education with the same determination that had once driven him to build his ranch. He learned to track game through country so rugged that it seemed impossible for anything larger than a rabbit to survive. He practiced with Comanche weapons, the powerful recurved bows that could drive an arrow completely through a buffalo, the war clubs and tomahawks that required both strength and skill to wield effectively. More challenging than the physical skills were the social and spiritual aspects of Comanche life. He attended council meetings where decisions were made through consensus rather than by decree, learning to listen carefully to all voices before offering his own opinion. He participated in ceremonies that honored the spirits of animals that had given their lives to feed the tribe, and in rituals that acknowledged the changing seasons and the eternal cycles of birth, growth, death, and renewal. Through it all, Ayana remained his constant guide and supporter. She corrected his mistakes without embarrassment, encouraged his efforts without false praise, and gradually helped him understand the subtle networks of relationship and obligation that held Comanche society together. Their own relationship evolved slowly and naturally during this period. They shared a tipi that Ayana had decorated with her own artwork, geometric patterns, and stylized animals painted in earth tones that seemed to capture the essence of the surrounding landscape. At first, they slept on opposite sides of the dwelling, maintaining a careful, respectful distance. But as the days turned into weeks, they began to talk late into the night, sharing stories of their respective childhoods and dreams for their future together. Samuel learned that Ayana had been married once before, to a young warrior who had been killed in a raid against Kiowa raiders 3 years earlier. The loss had devastated her, and she had sworn that she would never again allow herself to love someone whose life could be torn away in an instant of violence. But then I realized that all life is uncertain, she told him one night as they lay listening to the wind move through the camp. Whether you are Comanche or white, whether you are a warrior or a farmer, death can come at any moment. The choice is not whether to risk your heart, but whether to live with an open heart or a closed one. Samuel, in turn, shared stories of his own losses, his parents, who had died in a cholera epidemic when he was 19, and his younger sister, who had succumbed to pneumonia the following winter. He told her about the loneliness that had driven him west in search of something he could not quite name, and about the years he had spent building a ranch that was supposed to give his life meaning, but had only left him feeling more isolated. "I think I was looking for a place where I belonged," he said, "but I was looking in the wrong places. I thought belonging was about owning land or having possessions. I did not understand that belonging is about connection to other people." As winter deepened and snow began to fall across the Texas plains, Samuel found himself settling into the rhythms of Comanche life. He learned to hunt deer and elk in the steep country beyond the camp, working with partners who communicated through hand signals and shared an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that seemed almost supernatural. He learned to care for horses in ways that went far beyond the practical requirements of feeding and grooming. The Comanche relationship with horses was spiritual as well as practical, based on mutual respect and understanding rather than simple dominance. Samuel's own horse, a sturdy bay gelding that had carried him faithfully for 3 years, seemed to sense the change in his owner and responded with increased trust and cooperation. Most importantly, Samuel learned to see himself as part of something larger than his individual wants and needs. Among the Comanche, no one succeeded or failed alone. The welfare of each person was tied to the welfare of all, and decisions were made based on their impact on the entire community rather than on individual advantage. This shift in perspective was perhaps the most profound change that Samuel experienced during his transition to Comanche life. He had always been self-reliant to a fault, suspicious of dependency and uncomfortable with intimacy. But gradually, he began to understand that true strength came not from independence, but from interdependence, not from isolation, but from connection. The change was most evident in his relationship with Ayana. What had begun as a marriage of convenience and mutual benefit slowly transformed into something deeper and more meaningful. They began to anticipate each other's needs and thoughts, to work together as a team rather than as two separate individuals sharing space. The transformation was completed on a cold December night when Samuel woke to find Ayana shivering beside him despite the warm buffalo robes that covered their sleeping area. Without conscious thought, he reached out and drew her close, sharing his body heat and offering comfort through simple human contact. She came willingly into his arms, and they lay together in the darkness, listening to the wind howl around their tipi and feeling the deep contentment that comes from knowing that you are exactly where you belong. "Are you sorry?" she asked quietly. "Sorry that you chose this life instead of your old one?" Samuel considered the question seriously before answering. 6 months ago, he had been a property owner with a future mapped out in cattle and cropland. Now he was a member of a nomadic tribe, living in a hide tent and dependent on hunting and gathering for survival. By any conventional measure, he had traded prosperity for poverty, security for uncertainty. But as he held his wife in his arms and listened to the sounds of the sleeping camp around them, children murmuring in their sleep, horses nickering softly in the darkness, the eternal whisper of wind through grass, Samuel knew that he had never been happier or more complete. "No," he said with absolute certainty, "I am not sorry. This life, this choice, this woman, they are all gifts that I did not know I needed. I would make the same decision again without hesitation." Ayanna turned in his arms so that she could look at him in the dim light that filtered through the smoke hole at the top of their tipi. "And I am not sorry that I chose to save the life of a stubborn white rancher," she said with a smile, "even if he does still speak Comanche like a buffalo with a sore throat." Samuel laughed and pulled her closer, knowing that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. He had found his place in the world at last, and it was here, in the arms of a Comanche princess who had chosen to see the man he could become rather than the man he had been. Outside, the wind continued to blow across the endless plains, carrying with it the sense of sage and snow and the promise of spring's eventual return. Inside the tipi, two people from different worlds had found a way to build a bridge between their separate histories and create something entirely new, a love story that transcended the boundaries of race and culture and spoke to the universal human need for connection, understanding, and belonging. Samuel Crawford, former rancher and current Comanche warrior, slept peacefully in his wife's arms, dreaming of the life they would build together and the children who would carry their story into a future where the divisions between peoples might finally be healed by the simple recognition that love is stronger than fear and hope more powerful than hatred.